The healthcare industry is all consuming in the American economy. Today, we'll talk about how to get entrepreneurship and innovation out of the sector. Today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization for the community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Here, we talk about building better companies, building better innovation ecosystems. And one of the big topics for most of my 15-year reporting career is that darn thing, healthcare. It's an enormous part of the American economy, for better and for worse. For years, people avoided entrepreneurship coming out of this segment for all of its regulatory obstacles. But in the last 3 to 5 years, we technically have seen growing reapproachment of healthcare to bring innovations and entrepreneurship. I'm going to talk about that today, how that works, what can be done better with an old friend of mine, actually, Chris Cera of Arcweb Technologies. Chris, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Chris, full disclosure, you and I have played some basketball. You and I have talked about a lot of things through the years, but I will admit one of the nerdy things that cannot escape us has always been, hey, how does product innovation come out of healthcare? I know many of you think I'm lying, but no, truly, that's what Chris and I talk about. So start me off. What is your intersection with healthcare? Because I've never called you Dr. Cera. Why do I associate you with healthcare?
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here. I'm definitely not a doctor. I'm the CEO of Arcweb Technologies. We're a strategic product development company focused on healthcare companies. We assemble high-performing cross-functional teams. We work on the company's most important needs in experience design and custom software development. We're a certified B Corporation. We've worked with over 100 companies. We've done over 200 projects. My career started at GSK. I worked in drug discovery, building software. Some of it included neural networks, which is a hot topic in the AI transformation today. And then fast forward a number of years, I actually didn't work in healthcare for a very long time. And Arcweb first started working with Penn Medicine close to 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago. And that was really our first project in healthcare commercially. So as far as like the ability to break into healthcare, we broke into healthcare, so to speak. And most of our experience at that point was either high growth tech companies or in financial services, which are both great markets here in the Philly region. And then eventually we worked with one hospital and another one. In 2016, we decided strategically to focus on the healthcare space and investing all of our research and development time into it. In 2018, we worked with a company called Control M Health, which was a physician research team out of Jefferson, tackling challenges for people living with migraine headaches. In 2020, we got into the interoperability space. We produced something called the Care and UX Guide, which even in the federal government's Office of the National Coordinator pointed to it as guidance around their new trusted exchange framework called TEFCA. We won a lot of awards in the last few years, Fast Company Innovation by Design, World Changing Ideas, Davies, and some others for our healthcare clients. And now we're building an open source platform in the clinical research space. We're planning to launch that later this year. One of our early projects includes a physician researcher doing a clinical trial where they designed a hybrid implementation effectiveness trial. We're actively looking for physician research leaders that want more tools for their clinical studies than just MyChart Mobile, RedCap, etc.
Just one thing for some lingo for me, physician assistant research, is that role at big institutions? What does that kind of role look like most commonly?
It can be certainly at a large healthcare delivery network, a large hospital system. When I worked at GSK, I worked with a team of chemists, people that have PhDs in chemistry, and there was a whole ecosystem of funding depending upon whether in a large healthcare delivery system like a hospital, a lot of times people are getting grants from the NIH and other government institutions for the research, whereas in a pharmaceutical company, it works quite a bit differently.
Okay, so help me get a little bit how product innovation looks inside healthcare. We have certainly covered a whole bunch of health tech, med tech, kind of university spinouts or startups range. But we also cover a fair bit of product innovation inside institutions. Can you give me a handle on this? How much of the product innovation that either you've worked on, you name dropped a bunch of big institutions. Is it primarily in big institutions? Is this stuff happening with commercialized spinouts or otherwise? Like, give me a landscape of where product innovation is happening.
Sure. I kind of broadly look at the healthcare industry in sort of three areas. So providers, those are the large hospitals, healthcare delivery system, the payers, which are the insurance companies, and then various product and
Hmm.
service companies. So those could be pharmaceutical, medical device, cell and gene therapy, wet labs, digital products, etc. There's lots of accelerators that are focused on health tech. Dream Ventures. I'm a Dream alumnus. In 2008, it's been a long time.
Hmm.
They have a really great program. Go to market content on their website and video content that really is pretty stellar. We see both insourcing and spinouts. Some spinouts here locally at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They spun out Bainbridge Health, Encore Medical, Spark Therapeutics, and the in the healthcare space, the offerings are quite different, whether or not you're a B2C company focused on going direct to consumer, or if you're like most, I would say most healthcare companies are more B2B, and it's just very different. You see a lot more partnerships in these B2B companies. The sales and marketing process is remarkably different. And a lot of these healthcare systems, you see these innovation pipelines at these providers where they'll provide patents, they'll provide coaching on entrepreneurship, and they try to do kind of like a community integration where they try to get entrepreneurs and other kinds of investors together with these innovators. But it's somewhat of a complex game trying to get people who are gainfully employed to strategically figure out how to unemploy themselves over time. So I think they have a pretty hard game. But if you talk to any of these folks that run innovation groups, they have really a pretty significant portfolio of a lot of opportunities, and it's really anyone's guess, like which one of these are the things that we should pursue from a business perspective, or just from a clinical perspective and from a need perspective. So it's really tough to figure out where for these large organizations to focus. And so generally, I kind of recommend people spin these out as soon as possible for a variety of reasons. And I would say my rough study of a number of these, I feel like that is generally the better advice.
Okay. All right. If I have time, I might loop back on that. But just this is going to be kind of base level for you, Chris. But help me. I got to think for lots of folks when we say healthcare, they picture their own personal experience, and so they might picture like devices and instruments. I know your work is quite separate from that, and these worlds are very vast. But just help clarify when we say healthcare, how do you umbrella out like devices from software interventions, products, mobile applications, data science, this whole basket of software?
Yeah, most of my experience is in software. So I'm not a medical device expert. That is like really a whole art and science unto itself. The FDA has a risk classification mechanism, and then depending upon whether you're class 1, 2, or 3, there's essentially a different go-to-market and regulatory framework that you have to adhere to. However, in the software space, there's a lot of challenges because if you look at what's called the software as a medical device (SAMD) requirements,
Hmm.
if you have a conservative lawyer at a large company, which there are many conservative lawyers at large companies, they have
That's where they're bred, Chris.
they have almost no incentive to say, oh yeah, you should build this software tool, even though it might be overlapping with the software as a medical device requirements, and therefore be within the scope of the FDA as a regulated medical device. And if you have a conservative attorney, you could look at really even a simple BMI calculator, which is like a very basic calculation, is arguably being within the scope of that. So my hope is that the regulations get cleared up within the next few years. There are some documents I can forward to people if they're interested, guidance from the FDA, which a lot of the industry is watching in this regard. But anyway, just want to say I'm not a med device person, generally speaking, and more of a software person.
Just so I better understand how this landscape works, like someone like Arcweb, I've known for a long time, done these projects. Who are you actually interacting with? You mentioned kind of delivery like hospitals, payers like insurance. You have the pharmacy and therapy. You also have individual entrepreneurs that I'm sure are trying things. Where is someone like Arcweb fitting into that landscape?
It's really a mix, and I think it's true for anyone that's trying to provide services in the space of healthcare. So at providers, oftentimes my like dissection of the organization, you have kind of core clinical operations, which is like the bulk of the delivery system, which is like one area that you can focus on. You can also just focus on research, looking at people who are getting grants and funding through various programs for research. It my experience has been that surgery tends to also have almost a whole other culture and sort of market that's a little bit different too. So you can kind of target the surgery market. So there are all different areas where people are coming from, which is why it's hard to just put any one single framework on top of this and try to sort of wrap it all up in a playbook, because all of these the different therapeutic areas are truly kind of fundamentally different. But there are certainly patterns that shape the market from a go-to-market perspective, and the best the advice that I generally get in this space is by talking to other entrepreneurs and people that are really trying to hack the system, as it were, to get their software they're offering and their treatments to market.
So you alluded to a world of accelerators around the country. We technically have covered tons of either tech transfer offices or essentially departments that kind of offer like that. I really appreciate it. I got your line there of efforts that are internally trying to help people strategically unemploy themselves. So I get this orbit that exists, that many research facilities or even in-house institutions that are operating at scale find these, we could solve this problem we have for ourselves. Do we do it internally or should we spin out? Are those kind of folks calling you, people who are running these organizations, or do you talk to people who are themselves, I work at a large institution, or I used to work at a large institution and I know of a problem that I want to try to solve? Who's calling people like Arcweb?
Yeah. So traditionally at Arcweb, our main source of new projects comes from referrals from existing projects. But generally speaking, though, it comes from all of those places. It comes from research. It comes from the innovation groups, because the innovation groups are the ones playing that game of trying to get gainfully employed people to unemploy themselves. And so, they're often the ones that are providing some level of funding or gap funding in order to help sustain these companies and to help them continue their commercialization journey. And sometimes that can be in the form of a patent. Sometimes that can be in the form of an internal accelerator where you're teamed up with advisors and things like that. So we get calls from all of those places. I would say we get less around core clinical operations. That is generally, I feel like, a harder space to break into. The EHR market, and if you consider Philadelphia, Epic really is the only game in town. If you think of Penn, Chop, Jefferson, Mainline, Temple, everyone's either on it or converting to it in some form or fashion for the health systems that they've acquired.
And I just don't know. So Epic is an electronic health record provider, that EHR, and so they sell to most, but it's a national EHR.
Correct. Yeah. So they tend to really set the standard in a lot of ways of care delivery, because that's kind of the base system that they're working from. And so you kind of have to start a lot of the experiences from there or from their data. And it's kind of an art form to figure out how you can commercialize, how you can have freedom to operate, and really how you get clients one by one in a startup sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's talk about what's actually different. So I will admit I share the running joke that for the 2010s, folks mostly tried to avoid regulated industries. I remember the first rise of from some of those accelerators, like DreamIt, shout out DreamIt. And I can remember some of our reporting was, it's novel that people are looking at this highly regulated, very difficult to break into, very institutionalized sector. And we've been reporting about how that's shifting, in part the 2010s cheap money era, kind of like we've run out of food delivery apps to solve for. And so we're just moving toward increasingly difficult problems. That's a narrative I have. I guess one, call bullshit on that narrative, because I sure say it a lot. And talk to me a bit about what is truly different about building software projects in and around healthcare than when you were doing them in other sectors, less regulated ones.
Yeah, thanks. I think about this all the time. We
nerd
have worked a lot in various sectors, right? And so the healthcare sector and why it's different is something that I'm constantly thinking about. And in general, if you think about it, bad science and bad information kills people every day. So does bad politics. And this is an area that can get pretty political. If you think of people that have issues helping people with mental health conditions, like substance use disorders, the over surveillance of people with HIV, women's health issues are front and center right now. Putting all that aside, regulation is also, it's a very regulated market. And I oftentimes will say it's a rigged market in a lot of ways. So you have the employer market, which is large employers, and then you have the government market, which is Medicare and Medicaid. And that's what they call the payer mix. So if you talk to someone at a large health system, and you can look at health systems and compare them based on their payer mix of that city. So you compare Boston to Philly and their payer mix. 23% of the GDP for the country is spent on healthcare. About 75% of that is the government payer. So the rest of it is that employer space. Certainly some exceptions, but the government's not exactly known for innovation. Some innovation is happening in the self-insured employer space, and this is part of the go-to-market strategy for a lot of these B2B companies where they're selling directly to a self-insured employer like a Comcast and trying to get them to approve their therapy, as opposed to going a different commercial pathway. And as you know, employers are spending a ton for healthcare, which is why Amazon and Walmart and others are continuing to try to get into the space. And the last way that I think about the rigging of the market is that employers can buy a health plan for their employees essentially tax-free, whereas like a citizen, you can't actually buy it on the federally facilitated exchange in that way, which is why kind of employers rule. And we have this system of like lots of people that have jobs and healthcare. That's that's one way, and then people that don't have as good of healthcare. And so you kind of have this tale of two markets in some way. So the regulations is a big part that trickles down into the rigging of the market. And then you have marketing approvals, right? So the FDA has regulated anything that's making some kind of medical claim. You have to have proof that it works in order to make those medical claims. That proof is usually done in the form of randomized controlled trials, but you can see so many ways that these randomized controlled trials can still be gamed. I recommend the book Bad Science, for instance, if you want to learn about the techniques that some people have employed and the ways that you can essentially shoot holes in various clinical studies, because it's really easy for news agencies to just pick up a research paper and just start basically quoting from it, but that doesn't mean that the research is very good. The next tier is financial evidence. So not only do you want to have clinical efficacy that your product works, you also want to show that it actually costs less or it has a very different risk profile. So if you consider there's an app called Sleepio for insomnia disorder, it has more clinical studies than Ambien, the pharmaceutical that is often taken for insomnia disorder. It has more clinical studies, so arguably it has an efficacy that is better, comparable, etc. And only now it doesn't really have the financial efficacy. So they've had to sell into self-insured employers. They're now going to be generating that financial data. So then they can go back to the market and say, we not only have clinical efficacy, we also have financial evidence that this actually costs less. So you have to kind of prove all these things. And that's something that Big Health, if you want a good example company, has done really well, and sort of like threading the needle of all the regulations. They took advantage of a lot of the COVID restrictions where they had enforcement discretion for mental health products during COVID. That was a restriction that the FDA relaxed, which is pretty amazing and pretty remarkable. And there's label regulations and some other things, but it's generally speaking, I would say it's harder. Like comparing like other startups and other markets, I do believe like truly that healthcare is quite a bit harder. It means you don't always win your projects for the right reasons. It means you don't always lose for the right reasons. You can't just bulldoze your way into these companies. It requires a reasonable, well thought out, coordinated plan, which is why, big companies do this very well. You might need $10 million to bring something to market in this space. So it's just quite different.
Okay. I've gone over, but I wonder if you could send me out with a bit of advice for readers, listeners, etc. I'm thinking these folks who either are inside the institutions and are aiming to commercialize an idea they're a part of, or they're part of the coordinated effort to get people to gainfully unemploy themselves, or you're otherwise related to the sector and you want to get in. What's kind of your advice of starting that entrepreneurship or product innovation journey from your experience?
Thanks. Yeah, I think most startup rules apply in a lot of cases. I think confidence is key. That was definitely one of the challenges for me early in my own entrepreneurial career. If you really want to do it, then you need to orchestrate how you're going to take the plunge. That can be really complex, dealing with family, friends, and all of the doubters that are going to be out there that are just going to tell you to basically keep your job and keep everything stable. I still think spinning out, as fast as possible as a general strategy without knowing other parameters is a good strategy. But you can also, continue to get non-dilutive funding in these organizations over time, have a great licensing deal with your employer, and then spin out eventually. So there's certainly a place for that. If you decide to stay in the org. And yeah, I would just say good luck to people. I'm glad to talk to anyone that's thinking about venturing in the space, and glad to be helpful.
Chris, thank you. Went a little over time. Thank you for your patience. We'll make sure to drop Chris's contact information for those who are in and around healthcare, innovation, product launch, or entrepreneurship. Chris, thanks as always for the time and educating me on the topic.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Chris. We'll see everyone next time. Bye.